Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, good afternoon. Sorry to interrupt all the great conversation, but sadly that is my job. So if I could have your attention. So I hope you all had a great morning and are filled with big ideas, with powerful strategies for success, and even the ability to talk to traffic engineers. I wish I could have seen all the great content. Particularly, I want to know how well Rock Miller did playing the role of a vehicular cycling advocate. How did he do? Was he good? I also heard that the meeting scheduling for tomorrow is going really well, that state coordinators, thank you, have been doing an awesome job inputting all the information. 371 out of 435 435 House seats are booked and ready, and the meetings are set. So congratulations. You're going to have a full and busy day up on the Hill tomorrow. Our lunch today is sponsored by BikeLaw.com, who I mentioned briefly last night, a network of personal injury lawyers. Yep. Where are you all? Where are they? There. Right there in front of me, right under my nose. A network in 24 states and growing, specializing in bike crash cases. Now, you may think that having a strategic partnership with a network of bike-only personal injury lawyers feeds into the whole cycling is dangerous narrative, but let me assure you, these people would like nothing better than to eliminate the need for their own particular legal niche and get to work in other areas. They are cyclists, and they're increasingly involved in local and state advocacy work. So connect with them if you haven't already done so. For example, Peter Wilborn, I know, who's our main point of contact, recently worked with the Palmetto Cycling Coalition to take their state bike summit on the road by bike to 6 cities with programs in each destination, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And I don't know, do you think I should mention that idea to staff as we debrief on the National Bike Summit? We should have a 6-day ride as part of the program. Anyway, we're talking about big ideas. We're talking about Bikes Plus. And as you've heard from speakers already, we're thinking more about how bikes can help others achieve their goals and objectives. And as we thought about this shift in the context of our strategic plan, we're mindful of the warning we got at this summit 2 years ago that the traditional laundry list of reasons why bicycling is awesome, which are all valid, but can sometimes be counterproductive. And with any one individual member of Congress or local elected official, you have to find that one point of contact, that one topic on which to make a connection. And it seems to us, obviously, that health is very often going to be that one issue. So I'm delighted to introduce our lunchtime speaker. Dr. Aletha Maybank is a young, highly respected physician on a mission. She's currently an assistant commissioner at New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, where she is the co-founding director of the Center for Health Equity. That doesn't even begin to do justice to the remarkable number of things that she has done. She has a blog to make health a more accessible topic, with the idea that wherever one lives, works, plays, and prays, you should be able to find out about health. And her blog, On Call in the City, is a must-read. She has a regular column on ebony.com. She's got professional qualifications that are pretty impressive. A BA from Johns Hopkins University, an MD from Temple School of Medicine, MPH from Columbia School of Public Health, a double board certified physician, founding board member of the Artemis Medical Society. This is extraordinary stuff. Check out these awards. 40 Under 40 Award from Network Journal. Mover and Shaker from NV. Is that Nevada NV magazine? No. That's pretty good. How about Outstanding New York City Leader? Another award from 2012. Women of Excellence from Diaspora Services. How could you top that? Well, how about Heroine in Excellence from Beauty and the Beast? I mean, her colleagues describe her as being a true inspiration, authentically engaged, a strong supporter, committed and passionate. I'm really excited to have Dr. Aletha Maybank.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. That's what I thought. That was an introduction like I've never had before. Okay, I have to live up to those shoes. All right, so it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today representing New York City, and specifically New York City Department. Yes, woo, New Yorkers in the house. And to be representing the health department as well. I want to thank Andy and the League for inviting us here today to do a presentation and to talk about something that's very important to us all, but also us in New York City, as it is Mayor de Blasio's platform and a part of his platform, as well as the Health Commissioner, Mary Bassett, to ensure that all New Yorkers have the opportunity to achieve optimal health. And so I'm going to take you through kind of a story, in a sense, of some of the work that we've been doing really on a local level and a neighborhood-based level, understanding that we think that's an approach to advance health equity, is that even though broad policies are fantastic, they can change behaviors in many ways and influence how we do things and how we go about our lives. We understand that not all policies are implemented in an equitable way, and that all people have the opportunity to benefit from the policies that are put forward. And so a lot of our efforts as the health department, and now I oversee the Center for Health Equity, which was recently launched, is to really focus in on the neighborhood level. So I'm going to take you through some of that work that we've been doing. So, moving forward, I hope I'm going to do this right. There we go. Okay, so why, as the health department, are we doing this? For most people in this room, it's pretty obvious, but there was a question that was posed to me that struck me, and that was that why is the health department doing this? And to me, it seemed obvious. But what I realized is not every health department is engaged in this kind of work as actively as New York City is, and that this work is usually thought to be left to the Department of Transportation. But in New York City, and fortunately, we have been working very closely with other city agencies to achieve these optimal goals of really improving health across the city. So that is our big framework, coming from the health department, of why we are involved in doing and in promoting active transportation, both biking and walking. And we know that lives are saved by the more physical activity that all of us do throughout our lives. The other big part in the equity focus is that we want to ensure that all New Yorkers have these opportunities. And if we look at this particular map, and you don't have to look at anything in detail, but if you notice the maps, this is New York City. Do I have a click or pointer? That's not, I do. Okay, so I'm over, oops. It's not going to go that far. Okay. Anyway, no worries. So looking at this map, if you see the dark areas on this map, they look pretty much in the same places in every single one of these maps, correct? So we're looking at diabetes, AIDS, asthma, hospitalizations, and infant deaths. The dark areas seem to light up pretty consistently in the same places. And so we know that there are areas around the city and neighborhoods that do not have that opportunity, who are not achieving optimal health as compared to other neighborhoods in the city. And so our focus is, again, how do we ensure that these people and all people in our communities have these opportunities? So the story of the bike path. So one of our claims to fame in New York City is that we can claim that we have America's first bike path. It is located on Ocean Parkway, if anybody's from Brooklyn. Brooklyn, yes. You can clap. That's where I'm from. So I love Brooklyn. In 1894, they opened their first bike path, and it was really exclusively for bikers. And it was created by the same folks who created and designed Central Park as well as Prospect Park. And as you can see in the picture, everybody looks very happy. It's a great place. It was a space where those who really valued biking, valued being outdoors, they can enjoy that space. But one of the stories, and the part of the story that's not told, is who really had the opportunity and who had access to biking at that time. At that time, it was still considered a very elitist activity to participate in. They had lots of exclusive bike clubs that many folks were not allowed to be a part of. And the story is really, we realize, is not just about bike lanes, but it's this history and this intersection throughout history of communications, of communities, and how we've interacted with the power systems, how we've interacted with each other, and how it has prevented folks from experiencing life in the way that we all want to experience life. And so we know that certain communities have been excluded, certain communities have felt displaced, but however, we also know that there's much opportunity and triumph that has happened over the years, and that even with barriers such as racism and discrimination, that we still have the opportunity to overcome. And so a story is of exclusion and triumph. Have anybody heard of who this person is? Exactly, Major Taylor. And so Major Taylor actually did his first race on that same Ocean Parkway path that I showed you a little bit earlier. But he was also the first African American to become a world champion cyclist even before he became a national champion cyclist, because he was not allowed to participate in races here in the United States. And many of you probably know that story, but another story of exclusion but triumph at the same time. When we look at perceptions about African Americans, I hear this a lot, that our communities do not want to be involved, they don't want to bike, they're not civically participating, which we know some evidence that that definitely is true, but just this perception that we don't want to be a part of the conversation. And we know in history, and this is a prime example, Benjamin Banneker, we're here in Washington, D.C., an urban planner, very much involved, very much an advocate for ensuring that our cities and our streets are safe so that everybody has the opportunity to use them in the ways that we feel that they should be used. And then this is, does anybody know what movie this is from? Do the Right Thing. And so bikes and the history of bikes also brings in the conversation around gentrification and displacement. And the feeling that many communities, and this is happening across New York City right now, that once they start to see a person that's not of color or a white individual and they have a bike, it means for them that they no longer possibly belong and they have to find somewhere else to go. And so the importance of bringing this up is for exactly that, is that it's important for us to recognize this history. We can't do anything to change it. Understood, that's very clear. But to acknowledge it is extremely important if we want to really engage and have multiple folks at our tables of planning and doing the work that we think is so important. And so in New York City, as we went about this work, we all understand the 5 E's of changing our environments, but we add a 6th E, and that's of engagement and making sure that it's meaningful. And meaningful in the sense that, again, we are valuing community expertise, we're valuing community knowledge, and when I say community, I mean the residents that are living there in the spaces who are most affected by the diseases and by the socioeconomic conditions that they're experiencing. And so our way of going about this in the New York City Department of Health, we actually have district public health offices, and they're located in those same maps that I mentioned earlier. They're located in those communities directly so that we actually have access, pulse, understanding of what's happening. We build lots of relationships with many different community partners. We have local level research units that also do a lot with understanding what's there, and we have service program and delivery. But we're moving and shifting more towards how are we doing joint community health planning so that the neighborhoods are not just of what we think as a city agency or as a government or a community-based organization should happen, but what is good and what is of value for the residents that are actually living there. And so in 2011, we started to go and embark on a process of where we went through this meaningful community engagement and really provided structure to this process. Now, I'm presenting this slide first, but I will be honest. Collective impact is not actually what we set out for, but we realized that was what we did as we were going through this process. So I'm kind of building in what we did to this particular framework. But understanding any work with neighborhoods and different communities, there are lots of different models for community engagement, and this is just one of them that we did use. Collective impact, which a lot of people are hearing about right now. It's kind of the buzzword and somewhat the jargon word. But it has these different 5 components to it about communication, common agenda setting, mutual reinforcing activities, shared measurement, and backbone support, which I'll go through quickly. So we had received funding from New York State Department of Health it was called Creating Healthy Places. And we had to do things around improving physical activity or increasing physical activity, improving food access. But we wanted to start and embark in a very different way than we had before. And so because we have relationships with lots of community boards in many of our different neighborhoods, we set out and started that conversation to say and ask to our community boards, so if we wanted to get people to bike and walk more, what needs to happen? And this was the answer, was that the streets need to be safer. But a lot of things are about timing. So even if they came to us or we went to our community residents and asked this question, there have to be several igniters kind of a fire in order for things to really move forward. And so also at that time, the woman who's actually in this photo, Miss Betty, she's in her 70s, and she was president of her bike club in East New York. And she wrote a letter to her community board to say that they wish they had more bike lanes in East New York so that it was safer. We also heard from folks that felt that it was racist that they didn't have bike lanes, but then we heard from folks that it was racist that they do have bike lanes. And that the bike lanes were slowing traffic down, it was causing congestion and asthma, and they know people have asthma rates, so this was just a way for us to have higher asthma rates. All of that. And then the other piece was Department of Transportation. In Brooklyn, there's another area called Bed-Stuy, which a lot of people have heard of Bed-Stuy. Bedford, yes? Back there. Bed-Stuy, tremendous history. But in Bed-Stuy, and Bed-Stuy and Park Slope, actually, there was, at that time, and to kind of put it nicely, there was tension with DOT communities feeling DOT not engaging with communities in the way that they wanted to be engaged with, and that they were placing bike lanes down. There was a huge initiative, a huge push to increase the bike lanes by a lot in New York City a couple years ago. And we're still continuing with that plan, but the process of how we did it wasn't really resting well with some of our neighborhoods across the city. And so this provided an opportunity for us as a Department of Health to actually approach DOT along with another community partner, Brownsville Partnership, who received the same exact funding that we did, the same exact funding from New York State to do the same exact thing. And I think it was very intentional by New York State. So we were able to kind of come together, go to DOT, DOH, Brownsville Partnership, and say, you know what, we know residents are actually really interested in walking and biking more. They do. But they want it to be safer, but we know as DOH, we can't do it alone. We can promote and say it's healthy to bike and walk, but we need help in order to change that infrastructure that people bike and walk in. And DOT was actually very open. I think initially a little bit hesitant because this isn't the way that they usually operated. But they came on board, and we also put out that if you're going to come on board and we go through this process and there was the suggestions that things need to be changed or recommendations for changes in the neighborhood, you couldn't pull back and say you can't do it, because that's how communities have been treated historically. And so that we had to push forward and figure out what the plans were going to be so that all of us were happy at the end of the day. And we had many partners that were involved, and many of you are either from these organizations that are in the audience, but thank you for all of your help and all of your partnership as we've gone through this. So these were our backbone support. We went through many activities. We had school programming that happened. We did, I think it was 6 town hall meetings. We had 6 community bike rides, and the community bike rides actually, they were with DOT, DOH staff, as well as with community residents, to go through the neighborhood to identify not where necessarily best bike lanes that came afterwards, but where were areas in the neighborhoods that were not safe as far as crossing streets and all the infrastructure changes that, or recommendations for changes needed to happen. And then we had ongoing communication, of course, and this picture to the right, it's one of my favorite moments of this process of just watching. It was amazing to kind of just see everybody gathered at the table, really pinpointing and bringing their own expertise of what they understood about the neighborhood, what DOT understood about how things could be done, what DOH understood about health, and it all coming together at the same time. And it really helped support and facilitate building trusted relationships. And so these are some of the photos that we have and questions that we asked our residents are, why is it tough to ride here? And then these are, the wide streets. There were no markings, no bike racks. Potholes were in the streets, and there was lots of double parking. There were no lanes really at that time. And then shared measurement, which I mentioned is another important part where we have to track what's happening. We're doing bike counts, and we've done bike counts, and also street intercept surveys as well, in before and after. This was the proposed timeline. So after this process, so we're now in 2015. This started in 2011, this conversation, which, 5 years or 4 years in 2011 seemed like a really long time, but it's now 2015 and time goes by really quickly. But this is a proposed plan that DOT put forward, and we've really kept to this plan, and so I'm going to go through what these changes look like. So this is in the box, you can see it says Brownsville and East New York. And there are really no bike lanes that are really in that area at all. This was the beginning of the project. And DOT had already had plans to put about 7 miles of bike lanes down, but after going through this community planning process, the community and DOT, DOH all came and said, we're going to put 28 miles of bike lanes down. And so this is the map that was proposed as far as the bike lanes that would be put down. So you can see the purple ones are the community proposed routes. And the DOT ones proposed routes are the blue dashed lines. And so DOT went with the entire proposal and with everybody's proposed routes. And so now we have and so from there we have about, my staff sent me this morning, 9 plus 5, 14 miles placed so far, maybe a little bit more. In 2013, so here we go. So this is what was done in 2013. This is about 9. I think now we're about up to 12 to 15 miles. So they're continually putting miles or bike lanes down. And then this is another before and after picture, Mother Gaskin Boulevard and Major Boulevard. And the infrastructure changes, the painting of the lines that have been made and clearly demarcated. Bike racks. This to me is the most impressive thing. 562 bike racks were installed in this area. And these are installed. It's not even planned. These are already installed from that time. And this is Pennsylvania Avenue, another huge avenue in East New York. And you can see kind of the before and after as well, the widening of the streets and the narrowing at certain points that are important to help pedestrians, not only bikers, but pedestrians as well. And so coming to the end of the conversation that I'm bringing, is a larger context of advancing health equity, and I was asked to connect it to Black Lives Matters. And the way that I do this is several ways. I'm fortunate at this time to be working under the leadership of Dr. Mary Bassett, who started the Center of Health Equity a little bit under a year now, really to push that conversation on how does racism, discrimination really affect how we deliver health in the health department as well as across the city, and not to shy away from that conversation, because it really is an important part on how we figure out how do we all come to the table together, recognizing our own biases, and we all have them, but recognizing how we have them as organizations and institutions becomes very important as well. If we really want people at the table with us, we have to start at that point. And so all of this work is really saying that we really value community expertise. And even if you take race out of it, though I don't do that for the most part, but if you take race out of it, it's just valuing what somebody else feels, what somebody else knows, what somebody else experiences, that we all want for ourselves. And it takes an explicit conversation in order to do that, and to start shifting away from assumptions that we tend to make. And a lot of it's scary, quite frankly. A lot of us have fear, and it takes a lot of courage in order to do that. It takes hard conversations, it takes hard transitions. But we believe, at least at the health department for sure, that this is a possibility and it definitely can be done, and it's our responsibility. If we are really trying to improve the health of all people in New York City, that we address these issues that affect people on a day-to-day basis. We know from this work that it has actually helped shift how city agencies have understood, how they understand working with communities and neighborhoods. It has shifted their norms as well as the systems and the way that they're doing work. And as an example, DOT, at the end of this process, and we're not even at the end of the process, but through this process, has really, they're excited about this because it's rewarding. And where there were so much fears that, they couldn't work with communities because they have heard so much negative attention either through press or they just get so much negative feedback. But now this is like a positive engagement that they're having with neighborhoods, and they want to do this more and more and more and more. And so this is getting replicated across the city. And it really, and it have to have patience in order to do it. And so it's going to East Harlem. We're actually just launched something called Neighborhood Health Hubs. And so we're working in East Harlem, South Bronx, and breaking it down even smaller neighborhoods to do this kind of work. But again, at the end of it, it really is about what we value with ourselves and what we value as far as who's brought to the table. And that's the end of it. Cities, and Jane Jacobs, who we know, all know, that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's bikes with a big plus afterwards, so thank you. Dr. Maybank will come back up on stage in a minute to join our next speaker and Archie Ryback for a discussion of how bikes can help solve bigger issues from their perspective. But first, I want to introduce you to Megan Solly Wells, who was recently described this way in The Nation magazine. Mayoral participants included everyone from the high-profile chief executive of the host city, Bill de Blasio, to his far less well-known but equally feisty West Coast counterpart, Megan Solly Wells. She hails from Culver City, California, a Los Angeles County enclave with a population smaller than some of the New York City neighborhoods we were just looking at. You might also have seen her, if not in The Nation, then in the September issue of American Bicyclist magazine. She was elected to City Council in 2012 as mayor of Culver City and says she has a passion for analyzing complex issues and encouraging community engagement with the ultimate goal of finding ideas that promote a resilient and sustainable city. Another well-qualified speaker, Megan has 2 bachelor's degrees from UCLA in World Arts and Cultures and French, and while living in Paris for 9 years, she says she learned about urban density, efficiency, alternative modes of transit, and how city planning could improve quality of life.
It is impossible to follow that act. So I want to applaud you and the work that you're doing once again, because that deserves love from this whole room. So I want to honor what you're doing. So yes, Megan Solly Wells, I represent a city that is just about 40,000 people, 5 square miles. Average temperature during the year about 72 degrees. Just a couple hills, but sorry, East Coast. But immensely bikeable. And let me just start by saying I'm totally thrilled to be here. I'm kind of nervous too, and I'm a zombie because I had 5 hours of budget hearings, and then I hopped on the plane, red-eye flight, and here I am. So if I space out, it's because I haven't slept. And I'm on California time and daylight savings. So now I can totally mess up, right? I'm motivated to be here above and beyond, above all because I'm a cyclist. And I know that if I design my community for cyclists, that I will raise the quality of life of everybody in my community, whether they bike or not. Also, if I help design my community for bikes, my commute is going to be a lot easier, right? before I was on the city council, my first real official position within the city was as the vice chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and we designed our very first bike and ped master plan, which, by the way, was done by Alta. Good job. And when we were going through this process, this advisory committee kind of gathered a great group of people, and it was based on public input. So we had a lot of wonderful meetings with people at the table, and it became abundantly clear to us that we needed the committee to continue, but it didn't. So what we did was a couple of us co-founded the Culver City Bicycle Coalition, which was, I think, the first or second. I think we're at the same time as Santa Monica. We're the local chapter of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. And I know, let's give a shout out to LACBC. I know we've got a lot. So, so it's been a great ride, and I guess my reason for being here is to try to inspire you to look at serving in local government. It's not sexy. It's hard, and you have to talk about parking a lot more than you would ever want to in your entire life. Although it's incredibly interesting, and it's incredibly worthwhile. And we almost have kind of a sad opportunity. Sad because turnout in our local elections is so dismal. Los Angeles had a city council election last week. Just over 8% turned out to vote in Los Angeles City Council. Hopefully it's a lot better in your communities. Our city council elections average about 20% turnout, but if you serve in that capacity with your advocacy lens, you can absolutely change the way people breathe, the way people look, the way people feel, climate change. These are things that, we're here to really advocate on a federal level. We need the funding. I certainly need the funding. We advocate with the state, again, for funding. But it's really the cities that are making these decisions. It's the cities that are deciding what the zoning is. It's the cities that's deciding to listen to some of the businesses who don't really understand how good that bikes are for their businesses yet and don't want that type of infrastructure in front of their businesses. When you and your advocacy role actually get that vote, you can amplify the work you're doing. So I had the pleasure of presenting at a panel last year at this summit. And the last slide, I'm just going to steal for myself and say, the last slide was, cyclists, consider running. That's my message. So should I go sit down?
That's great. I love that. So as Dr. Maybank and R.T. Ryback come up and set themselves up for a conversation on how bikes can help solve bigger issues, I did do a little bit of fact-checking with the former mayor. He said he was a fast cyclist, confirmed. Bike to Work Day, a commuter race in Minneapolis a few years ago. He stuck to the trail system, and the guy setting it up, Steve Clark, was worried he wasn't going to win. You set the route up to make sure the cyclist wins. He stuck to the greenway and still won, still made it fast enough. He must be a fast cyclist. And inveterate Twitter user and humorist. I understand, again, I'm just going by what I read on the internet, which I assume is true. But it says after you were lying in a hospital bed after surviving a heart attack, that you tweeted, "That shows politicians have big hearts."
There you go.
That's good. I like
There you
that.
go.
Mayor Ryback.
Nice.
Thank you. Good. Oh, so
Over to you.
very good. Okay. Well, we've just heard from two incredible people. Could we give a round of applause to these amazing people? It's really great work. It certainly is interesting to go from New York City and from really complex neighborhoods to Los Angeles. These are very different worlds, but we are talking about the same topic. It all seems so wonderful when you guys talked about it, but let's get real here. We've been, in these things. Tell me the absolute toughest thing you had to do to get bikes moving on this. I'm going to start with you. Up there.
Absolute toughest. It was the toughest thing I think we had to actually deal with as going through this process. So it sounds as if everything went extremely smoothly in one sense, and I think it did. But there was a moment where we had two community boards. So we had East New York and we had Brownsville. And Brownsville was fully on board and fully engaged. And so when all these proposals that DOT put forward, they have to have approval for the community board before they can even make these changes. And so we thought that everybody was on the same page in East New York. And it came to the point where it actually wasn't. And so the community board actually did not accept or did not vote for it to move forward. And so we had to take a few steps back and kind of you have to kind of suck it up in one sense and recognize like what did we do wrong here and what are the opportunities so that we can figure out how do we move forward. Because we were really on kind of a high of like, this is just great, everybody's happy, and then boom. And so those are normal processes in a sense. It can happen and you have to be ready for it. And you have to kind of think, how do we get out of this? But you also, again, engage with your partners to think about how do we get out of this? You engage with your residents to think about how do we get out of this? And so eventually they did approve it and we were able to move forward. But I think it's just, I feel there are so many different people coming together with so many different types of agendas. For many different things. Cyclists have their own agendas, and the government has their agenda, and different agencies have their agenda, the residents have their agendas, and how to align all of those definitely becomes very challenging. But I think at the end of the day, if we remember what it is, why we're trying to do, what are we trying to do, and what are we trying to change, or what are we trying to improve, and health was what it was, and we all agreed on that. Right. And just remembering that common goal and that common ground and getting people back to that point.
Okay, so Mayor, I can't imagine people in Los Angeles having multiple agendas, right? What was the toughest thing you had?
Well, there's one project that comes to mind that was actually before I was on the council. It was when I was still in my advocacy role. And the city had the chance for I think it was $1 million grant. Culver City is so small. We have one high school, we have one middle school, and then on the same campus, there's an elementary school. We call it the Tri-School Complex. And it's right in the middle of on the one side, it has a Class 1 bike path, Bionah Creek, excellent bike access. And the rest of it is in smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood. And there was a great Safe Routes to School project that was going to solve multiple problems. We started getting our Safe Routes to School funding from public health, LA County Public Health, so it was really with the obesity, diabetes, asthma in mind. But there's also a ton of traffic and parking issues, and kids when they are walking are getting near misses with cars. So there was a great project on the table, and it got completely torpedoed by some members in the community. I think the lesson learned was communication, engagement, taking the time, but funding, is so scarce and so rare that, when you have that opportunity, you just want it, you need it, you know it's the right thing, but, sometimes you can't just make those decisions like that. I mean, you have to bring people along. It's important, but sometimes it's heartbreaking too when those opportunities are missed.
Right. Now you have a new light rail line that comes right to you. And New York obviously has tremendous other types of transportation. How have you tried to integrate these different types of use? You showed us a fantastic new vision for biking in that community. How is it connected to the existing transit system?
Well, I think, we're growing as a city and figuring out, so that's one of the challenges actually, if I were to come back to it, is how do we also get residents and communities from all backgrounds and types to understand that streets and the whole complete streets concept,
Right.
And that how do we meet people where they're at? Because the reality is not everybody believes that. People still believe cars, and many of our residents in our communities feel cars, rule. And other people, cyclists, think bikes rule, and so it's how do we start to get people to understand that these are complete streets and that
Right.
these should be opportunities for everybody to be able to participate and to move about in the city in a way that is equitable. And so I think we have, with the new administration, I point this way because we have our mayor staff there, but with Vision Zero and it being implemented in New York City, it's our opportunity to kind of think through as a city, how are we coming together more so with all the other agencies
Right.
to think through what is the framework of how this all works together. What do we need to communicate? What are the specific policies that need to go in place, and how do we enforce all of those policies so that, one, it goes along with what we're trying to achieve, but it also doesn't come across as we are, attacking a certain community, or we're not allowing people to be a certain way or to have a certain freedom that they feel they should have.
Right.
So I do think this is an evolving conversation for us in New York City to figure out how best this all works together. And, it's just, I think what's good is that we're at a point where, one, the vision is tied to equity in the work that we're doing, and two, supporting this fact that all communities, and when I say communities, a lot of times people think of like black and brown, and I really try to push folks away from that, especially if they're in urban settings, but to recognize that we are all individual communities and that we have expertise that we bring to the table. But I think and agencies, and I think there's this opportunity in New York City to now bring city agencies together to really think through and plan.
Good, good. You obviously have this new light rail line that comes right to you. Have you been able to get bikes integrated into that?
We're working on it. We're working on a connector from the light rail. This is the Expo line that leads downtown LA, and it's about to go to Santa Monica. Connecting our downtown and the rest of our neighborhoods to the light rail. We're looking at bike share. Obviously, we're looking at it on a regional level, because Los Angeles is really funky. You've got LA proper, then you've got unincorporated LA County, and then you've got cities like mine that are independent cities, and the user doesn't care which is the border, except our city is, of course, better, but. So it's all about interoperability, seamlessness, and DC is a perfect example of this type of cooperation that's happening not only city to city but with different states. So I'm hoping we're using these models. The other thing that's really exciting in California is environmental justice. Environmental justice is part of our state EPA. They have a department, and they have a mandate to protect the most vulnerable and those communities that are suffering the most. So for our amazing AB 32 climate change solutions legislation, we've got we recognize in California that the #1 cause of greenhouse gases is through transportation. So the ports and the trucks and the cars. So we have a very clear mandate to make sure that we are changing the transportation paradigm. And what's wonderful is that with the cap and trade, we're finally starting to fund these things while also dedicating, I believe it's at least 20% of those resources to communities that are suffering, communities that are vulnerable. And so it's a very exciting time to be part of a state that has a mandate to do the right thing. Right. And that's actually going to start funding it. Obviously, it never happens as fast as we want it to, but I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and make sure I better mention it, definitely. The other process that we're going through in New York City, and you've already said you kind of have a sustainability plan and thinking through that, is Plan NYC, which was started in the Bloomberg administration. And so now we're at the time of rethinking, having a new vision, new framework, new values to how we think about Plan NYC, but we are right now in that process of developing those new goals and aligning them on many different levels with other national, international goals, but also what is it that we want to achieve as a city. So that's going to be an opportunity to think through the connectivity of it all. And then the other piece is City Bike, with bike share, which we is pretty large in New York City, and it is growing, and we are expanding into neighborhoods. And so the very neighborhoods that I mentioned earlier do not have access to bike share at this time. Except for Bed-Stuy, and the edge of Bed-Stuy does. And so, it's having, again, because we are at the table together more so, DOT, City Bike, or Alta, and all these other folks are at the table, as well as with our activists. We're now really forcing that conversation, I think, and really pushing the conversation of equity more so than we have before, and engaging our residents in the process of where would they like to see bike share, how far do they want to see it, in the city, plans being created from that perspective. And the same thing with Vision Zero. There was an opportunity for feedback that the city did provide. It's not completely ideal, and we know that there was an underrepresentation of residents in being engaged in this online process to provide feedback of what's happening in their neighborhoods, but it is a step in the right direction. And I think that's part of the work, is that you're not going to necessarily get it right when you first do it, but you'll have the opportunity to at least improve, and at least if you not acknowledge it and know that this is the direction you need to go, take it.
You had mentioned in that answer a bit about this idea of the previous administration. So you came into office at a period of time in which there had been some really groundbreaking and sometimes very controversial issues in biking. How do you navigate all of that and trying to make sure that something isn't seen as political as part of that administration or our administration, but part of the permanent infrastructure of the community?
Well, I think authenticity. You have to be honest about it. You have to acknowledge, because my feeling is people are very smart, in general, and they feel you in a sense, and whenever I go and talk to residents, I think it's being truthful and stating, this is how it was in the previous administration. These were the opportunities, these were the challenges. This is how it is in this administration. These are the opportunities, and these are the challenges. Most people who know me, I don't have a problem with speaking my mind and really speaking to truth, because I think there's power in that. But there's also power in saying, okay, it's not ideal, as I feel like I'm repeating myself, it's not ideal, but there is opportunity. I also believe in the possibility of most things. And so this is the reality of what it is. And so what is the solutions? What are the solutions that we're going to get to so that we can get to this point? Because no matter what, if it was the previous administration, it's this administration, I think we all still have that common goal that we want to achieve health for our communities. And we just have different ideas, perspectives, and values on how to get there. Okay. And so we're in an agency and a health department that values a particular way of doing it, and fortunately aligns with my values at this time. And so it makes it easier for me to move forward.
And Mayor, you come from a different perspective. You were an advocate, and now you're the man. You're not the man, but you're the man.
I'm better than the man.
All right, so here's the point. So how are you gonna navigate through those? Have you had to say no to some of your former colleagues and partners in crime? And how do you balance your new role, or maybe you don't?
I talked to the city attorney, and she says, yes, you can still be an advocate. So I'm good. things go a lot slower than I want them to, and right, that's it, because there are a lot. That's the big transition between advocacy and serving as an elected, is that there are more moving pieces than maybe you thought of, and then. As you were saying earlier, there's so many different interests, and you do have to listen to them. I mean, it is a democracy, and as much as I'm convinced that I'm right, I'm still not going to railroad, people if they feel something really strongly. We have to come to the table. It's really process oriented. So I'm in a very fortunate position because we have some amazing staff. Our public works director is a cyclist. And a lot of the people who work for him are cyclists. And our city manager walks from City Hall home. So I guess the thing is, we are, and then my role is to say to my staff, like, okay, you can do what you've been wanting to do.
I see.
Except, I'm only one vote. My mayor's vote isn't stronger than my colleagues. And there's an election coming up in 2016. I am, and you should, recruit. Just recruit. It is the solution in order to get the outcomes that you want. And especially in smaller cities, it's totally doable. If I could do it, I think a lot of the people that I know could do it too. So again, don't be afraid of the politics. It's not always what you want it to be. You do have to make compromises, but at the end of the day, you're doing that deep planning, the planning before the meeting, the outreach. You find your allies, you frame the debate, and that is truly exciting. And if we could get even 10% of the people in this room to take that step, problem solved, right? Problem solved. It would be revolutionary.
That's good. I think we have some time to open it up. So we can open it up for people to ask some searing questions of these great folks.
Microphones back there. Come on, this is not a shy crowd.
Go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am. You can just stand up.
Go.
I think running for office is one of the hardest things to do for bicyclists, maybe especially, is to ask for money and funding.
Yeah.
How hard was that for you, and how did it come about? Did the bike community support you among others? What communities did you get support from?
Well, Culver City's a kind of a small town, so I asked my dad for money. I also I didn't accept money from developers because that was just I didn't want that kind of influence. Even though it's perfectly legal to do that, I didn't want that. So we did, fundraisers. Again, it's a smaller town, so you can win an election with about $20,000 to $25,000. So you put on a couple events, you send out the letters, and the best thing is to get somebody to do it for you, because the ask is it's really hard to take that step. And then let me just say one other secret is there's no better way to engage the community than by biking, because you're out there. You see what, obviously you see the potholes, you see the light that's burned out, you're accessible to people, people see you. It's great advertisement. I mean, that's not why I do it, but it makes you very visible, and it makes you really accountable to the people you serve, which is, I think, kind of ideal. So campaign, like bike campaigning is really impactful. And yes, I did get support. And I think there are more groups forming in the LA area. Like, I think it's called I Bike, I Vote. I think people are getting more active and becoming more active in the political arena, and I totally encourage it.
My first race, people who biked voted for me and made contributions. By my third time, the bike community was very organized. And I think Tim Blumenthal, is Tim still here? Tim, you've actually, I was at a fundraiser once you did on a national level, which makes a lot of sense too. So open it up again. Go ahead, sir. Want to take this? Interact on the state level.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, and then I don't know, Helen, if you have anything that you might want to add to this too, but for myself, my interactions with the state level have to do with the state Office of Health Equity. So we have, New York City is a very large city, so our layers of government become large, and your degrees of separation are kind of large as well. And so my connection is kind of directly with who does the same line of work as I do. And so I can speak to that as far as, it's an opportunity for the state in New York State, which is different than California. I always joke around, and I don't know how much I say this, but California does a lot of things well before New York City does, but New York City gets a lot of attention for it because we have, we're in New York City. And so there's a lot of progressiveness that I value in California State, that sometimes on the state level, we have different levels and different types of politics that happens. Mm-hmm. And it prevents us from, I think, as a city-state collaboration, from moving as fast as we could in order to really engage neighborhoods in an equitable way, in a different way that we have before in the past, as you've kind of explained some of the work you've done. And so for us, our work is really thinking through, how are they going to show other counties within New York State some of the work that we're doing kind of by example? That's the power that they have at this time. How are they going to shift support and funding to the New York City Office of Health Equity to help support doing that work? It's through the grant that we were able to do this work right here. So really, there's support that we've gotten on the state level has been through funding, as well as voice and platform and sharing what it is that we're doing in New York City.
Good. One more question I think we can take.
We have a question back here.
Where are we?
Keith Benjamin, Safe Routes to School National Partnership. It's for Althea. I think it's important, and I appreciate your presentation and how you nuance the community building aspect. Probably gonna throw you a softball here, but can you speak specifically to how you engage the community in terms of the organizations that you brought on board to have the conversations? I think it's important for people to hear how
Sure.
innovative partnerships can look, especially outside of just the active transportation category, and how those voices can add to the conversation and push the work forward.
Absolutely. And what immediately came to my head is that I always say a lot of things are about relationships. Everything we do is about relationships that we have in life, and that relationships take time and they take patience, and the foundation is trust. And the way that we were able to bring people on board so readily is because we had already spent 10 years of being in that neighborhood, building the trust, building the relationship, so that when we wanted to bring another kind of power broker agency to the table, our residents were okay with that because they trusted us. And we were considered, and we still are considered, an honest broker in the neighborhood because we've been there. And that's with all of us in the room. You have to be present, and you need to be responsive in order to develop trust. We know that with our own personal relationships. This isn't rocket science. And so I always say whatever translates in your personal life is the same way that we have to think about how we engage with different people that may not be like us in our neighborhoods. And so we had built those relationships already. We have staff that sit on the monthly community board meetings. They're a part of the health committee of the community boards, just part of it. We already had work that we've been doing in the schools, so all the school activation work with Safe Routes, we already were doing. We had another grant from New York State as well. Funding did help. I'm not going to say it didn't. But we had relationships with 30 schools already in Brownsville and East New York that we'd been working with. The faith-based organizations, we have an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives that focuses on churches, mosques, and synagogues, and so we already had those relationships that were developed. So this was really building upon a long effort of nurturing relationships in order to help bring folks to the table.
I'd like to add also that it helps a lot when you have a group emerging from the community when you go to the community. I want to give a shout out to the Major Taylor Bike organization
awesome.
and Anthony Taylor over here,
Nice.
who is fantastic. And not only has he and they done just tremendous things for biking in the city, but he then went on the board of the City of Lakes Lopet organization, which is our huge cross-country ski race. And there are now hundreds of kids from North Minneapolis, from all different backgrounds, many who are living below the poverty line, most of whom would be considered people who do not, who are on the wrong side of environmental justice. They're getting them out cross-country skiing, biking, active lifestyle. So it's about biking, but it's really about taking control of your own health. And so great work that you guys do too. With that, I want to thank everyone. Please give these two great speakers a round of applause. Thank you. Good work.
Thank you very much. That was great. I appreciate your time and the conversation. Archie, thanks for coming back. Great job this morning also. And Dr. Maybank, you mentioned in answer to the last question the importance of relationships, of building relationships over time, that they take patience. That's what we're doing up on the Hill tomorrow. We're building relationships. And some of you have been coming for 5 years, 10 years. You'll be greeted like old friends. There are 74, 75 new members of Congress who we're developing a relationship with for the first time. So it is about relationships, and it gets easier the deeper the relationship gets, the more trust that you develop with those offices. So this afternoon, we're going to get into some awesome sessions, some slightly different format this year for those that have been coming for a while, because we're really focusing on 3 emerging critical top topics that I'm very excited that we've got thought leader sessions on with top people leading those conversations on Vision Zero, on transportation and equity, on retrofitting the suburbs. As a Fairfax County resident in this area, which is the quintessential suburban area, I'm really excited to learn that there is some hope for the suburban environment, and that it can be retrofitted and made more livable, more bikeable, more walkable. After those sessions, we're back here at 4:30 for state delegation meetings, your final instructions and updates on meetings and the topics and the agenda for Thursday, and more tips into how to make your meetings successful and build those great relationships. So enjoy the afternoon sessions. We'll see you back here at about 4:30.